It's been 3 years since the attack happened, and I still have a hard time talking about it. No one should expect anything like this to ever happen to them, nor does anyone deserve to go through something so heinous. I hardly talk about this story to anyone anymore, because no one believes me, but I swear on my life this is what actually happened to me. I work as a trucker, and I've seen my share in bizarre stuff, moving trailers across the country. I had a delivery to Columbus, Ohio, and was ahead of schedule, so I figured I could get some exercise and stretch my legs by stopping and going for a hike off the road in Brown County State Park in Indiana. I always loved driving through this area because of its natural beauty. I have a thing for forest. I was so excited to start off this hike. I started in the evening, probably 3 hours before it was supposed to get dark. Everything was great until the first hour was over. The birds were chirping, I saw a few deer, and watched little animals run around in the trees, and then it just stopped. The forest was dead silent to the point the only thing I could hear was my thoughts, contemplating life. At first I didn't care, but then I started to feel this random feeling of dread, despite having great thoughts before. The forest was green all around me, but at the same time, it just felt dead. There was no wind or noise but my breathing. I kept walking forward despite my internal instincts telling me to stop and turn around. I knew sooner or later I needed to turn back, because it would be dark if I waited too long. Out of nowhere, I started to smell this putrid smell, like rotting flesh. For the smell to be that intense, there had to be some dead huge animal close to my proximity. Out of curiosity, I searched all around for the source of the smell. My curiosity can be a bit morbid at times. I noticed as I walked further up the trail, it started to fade, so I walked back and had to go off trail to find it. After a few hundred feet of being off trail, I stumbled on not just one dead deer, but at least a dozen. There was even a dead coyote in the mix, and all the corpses were arranged in some type of pattern. This entire situation was just completely insane, and it scared the absolutely living shit out of me, because I realized something was not right with this situation at all. The organs of the animals were spilling out, and it looked like none of their flesh had been eaten. Despite having been horribly mutilated, I froze and just started trying to figure out what the hell was going on, until I heard a loud screech behind me. I can still hear that screech when I think about it, and no animal, and I mean no animal, that I have found sounds similar to what I heard. As I began to turn around, I felt claws dig deep into my flesh on my back and pushed me to the ground. I was in a complete state of panic, and I began to drag myself through the leaf litter of the forest floor. What knocked me over proceeded to slash the back of my body. I could feel the blood gushing out of my deep wounds. This all happened in a split second, but it felt like an eternity. Eventually, I found what little strength I had remaining, and turned my head toward my attacker. I expected to see a bear or a mountain lion, however, what I saw was far more terrifying and downright disturbing. It sure had claws like a bear, but they were twisted, and longer than you would expect. Also, this thing was standing on 2 legs. What disturbed me the most about how powerful, perhaps the most disturbing thing, was how deathly skinny this thing was, but at the same time, it was so powerful. I could see all of its ribs and bones through its flesh. To my disbelief, I could also see a few bones of this horrific creature sticking out. I still have a hard time believing this today. Most of the creature's flesh looked like it was in a state of decay. The hair was short and haggard, with clumps of it missing, showing rotten flesh. By far, the most terrifying part of this creature was its head. It was like no other animal I could describe. Just recalling the face sends shivers down my spine and almost puts me back into that state of shock again. The eyes were the absolute worst. They looked exactly like human eyes and were a ghostly blue. I made eye contact with the creature for only a second, but I felt him penetrating deep into my soul. A feeling I can't even describe. It felt like absolute dread, and I could tell this thing was in a complete state of suffering. I went into a state of shock and managed to play dead, and after a few moments, it wandered off, probably to look for more prey. Soon as I was sure it was gone, I managed to get up and stumble away. My heart was racing in fear that this thing would return. Even though I was in pain by the scratches on my back, I managed to run at a pretty fast pace. It took me an hour to reach this area from where I started hiking, but I managed to get back to my car within 20 minutes. I drove myself to the ER and explained what happened. They didn't believe me and thought that I was attacked by a bear. They said I was probably hallucinating because of the shock of what was happening, but I know what I saw. Never go hiking out in Indiana. There is something demonic in those woods. I'm haunted by this every night, and if anyone has any information on this, please contact me. My wife and I have been running the rat race for years, with the family, a house in the city, 2 dogs, a cat, and the stereotypical American dream. But the city took its toll, the neighborhood got worse, and crime rose, and we found ourselves looking for a way out. Our opportunity came when I was offered a new job out of state. It was a great career move, but we didn't want to move to a new city just to have the same problems again. So we started looking around, and found a great mountain community about an hour and a half from the job, and a great ranch-style house with a big back porch, windows everywhere, and a lot of property. The backyard had a big grassy area, and a creek that cut the property in half, then acres of wood beyond. It's huge. The house is more than twice the size of our house in the city. It's all updated, and has no neighbors within a mile. It's a radical change from the life we lived in the city, but best of all, it was less than half of what we were paying for our old house. The house was a foreclosure, and when we asked the listing agent about it, she simply said the old family had abandoned the property. We didn't really think anything of it. The first 3 months were uneventful, with us settling into our new life, the kids getting used to the new school, and the new friends, and most of all, us getting used to the big house and property. But then the weather turned cold, and things started to get weird on the property. It started with noises from the back of the property. We decided it was just things coming from the woods. Then motion lights around the house started going off randomly. Once again, we just chalked it up into being in the woods. But last night, it all changed. Last night was the most terrifying night of my life. One of the dogs was at the back door whining and scratching. I assumed he needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked out the back door. Instantly, something felt off. The dog bolted for the back property, growling and snarling. It was a cold night, about 30 degrees, but the dog plunged straight into the creek and out the other bank, running off into the woods in the back of the property. Flashlight bouncing, I ran after him, calling his name. I got to the creek and made my way across the makeshift bridge, trying to desperately follow him. I could hear the dog still growling and barking from somewhere up ahead, and I pushed further away from the safety of the house and deeper into the woods. That's when I heard it, a shriek like I've never heard before in my life. It was a mix of a moaning wail and metal on metal. It echoed through the trees and froze me in my tracks. My dog bounded its way back to me and cowered down behind me. I turned around and could just make out the warm glow of the house behind me and the cold dark ahead of me. I swung my flashlight around, wildly looking for the source of the noise, and then that's when I heard an even more terrifying noise. Out of the cold silence, my wife's voice floated all around me. "Babe," the voice called out. I whipped back around and could just barely make out the image of my wife, safely inside our house. The voice called out again. "Babe, I'm right here," came the voice from deeper into the woods. Then came another voice, just as clear as the other. It was my dad's voice. "Come out here," it called. I swung the flashlight around again, and this time caught the briefest glint of light bouncing off the eyes. The creature was in my beam of light for barely a second, but it was tall, maybe 6 feet, and ashen white. It had long, spindly fingers that grasped the trunk of a pine tree, and then it was gone. I turned back and ran towards the house. I ran headlong to the icy creek and stumbled. My dog ran past me, making it back to the yard and up to the porch. I dug my hands into the freezing mud bank and pulled myself out. not stopping to look back. When I reached the porch, I scrambled inside. My wife ran over to me, asking what had happened. I just shook my head, because I was uncertain of what happened myself. I had a growing sense of dread tonight, as the sun began to fall. We kept the dogs inside, and I haven't dared to look out the back. But as I sit here typing, one by one, my motion lights in the backyard keep going on. This takes place in 2008 in northern Ohio. My cousins invite me out to go on a camping trip, some hidden state park or whatever, and I happily agree because hey, Ohio has to be better than Indiana, right? So I drive out there to their house, and we pack up our tent and food and head out in his truck for a few hours into the boondocks. After miles of twists and turns, the road gets bumpy and I wake up, and we're off the grid. Like dirt road and grass off the grid. We park the truck and head up into the hills. For a couple of miles and make base camp at the top of a hill, overlooking a valley with thick trees on the edge across from us. Nightfall comes, and around 1 or so, around the fire, I ask the park's name. Well, they break into laughter and say, "It's not a park, but a native land, and we're camping upon some sacred hill." I call them out for lying, but they name a tribe which at the time sounded legit enough to not argue against. A few minutes later, we hear this scream howl that just drifts across the hills and right into our bones. We all grew up hunting, and have been around the country, and have had our fair share of animal calls and howls, and none of us could agree upon what it was. If anything, I would say a screaming fox, but deeper, and a wolf because of how it carried. This goes on for a few more times, and our laughter soon becomes uneasy, and it seems to be getting closer. The fifth scream sounded like it was coming from down in the valley, so we all look over in that direction. And I don't care if you believe me, but I swear upon this. Out of the tree line, we see what looks like a gangly, thin, naked man, who from this far away seems way too tall for normal. This thing takes off in a sprint on 2 legs at us, and without hesitation, all 3 of us run off the hill and into the woods toward the car. Being night, it only made the escape more terrifying. As we reach the bottom of the hill, we hear the scream again, this time from where our camp was. None of us turn back, nor check to see if the others are near us. After the fastest 2 miles of my life, we get back to the truck and floor it off the land and to the nearest McDonald's, where we sat until dawn with no words to each other. We agreed to go back in the morning to grab our things. We do, and to our surprise, nothing had moved or was taken, which seems weird because if someone was fucking with us, they would have trashed the place, or at least took a few things. We drove back to my uncle's, where we tried to joke about it and just move on. This stuff didn't bother me until I saw my friend play the video game until dawn, and I became uneasy because of how it looked like what we saw. When I was in my first year of college, I lived with my mom, and we lived by ourselves. My dad had passed away the year before, and we moved out of the house shortly after. I was glad because I had suffered a lot of paranormal trauma growing up there, and was glad to get out. One night, I was driving home on Highway 111 north after youth group, and I saw something that bewilders me. It was lightly raining that night. Mist crawled across the road from the cow fields on either side. The lights from the few gas stations nearby were reflected on the wet asphalt. I was driving about 3 car lengths behind a dark minivan with nobody else in sight on the roads. All of a sudden, I saw the van swerve to miss something in the middle of the road. I was going too fast, and the road was too slick to miss it. All of a sudden, I saw something. Framed in my headlights and silhouetted in the glowing red brake lights of the van speeding away. A tall, muscular man with the upper shoulders and head of a buck. It was like a minotaur, but a deer instead of a bull, and glowing red eyes. I clenched and braced for impact, then passed right through the figure. It was like it dissolved right there, into the mist. I am used to swerving to miss deer at night, but I should have nailed this thing on the driver's side. Nothing. I was too afraid to look in the rearview mirror as I gassed it and sped home. It was only a couple miles away, which was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. I raced into the door and locked it behind me. I told my mom, who laughed it off, but was concerned at my pale, clammy complexion. I only later found in research a being described like what I saw. The Wendigo, a Native American legend that was terrifying to me as a child, but I had never heard it described like this. On Dark Highway 111. This is a night I will never forget. Hi, I need to talk about this somewhere, where people will read it. On Thursday, February 17th, at around 1600 to 1700, I believe I spotted a Wendigo in a wooded area behind my residence. I live in an area where Wendigos could and have been spotted, so I don't deny that it was a Wendigo. Anyway, I have found mutilated animals and horrible scenes of death rot and decay that would make even well-seasoned veterans throw up. The sights have been just horrifying, and this really supports my theory that something is in the back of those woods. For example, about 1 month ago, I found my second dead fox. Its head and spinal cord were about 30 feet downhill from the mangrove's nest that was once a body. Its body had its front legs ripped off, and large scratches in its chest and sides. Furthermore, it was disemboweled, with its intestinal tract in the trees and bushes. There were also signs of a struggle because fur from another animal and some sort of black liquid were on the ground and under its nails. Now look, I'm leaving out a lot of details, but those should paint a pretty good picture for you. Now to the juicy part of my experience with this terrible spirit. So let me lay out the land for you. My house is about 100 yards from a small stream that splits the small wooded area in half, and on the far side of the stream from my house, there are large trees. So I was out there one day, and all of a sudden, I felt cold and uncomfortable, like I was being watched. I also became increasingly paranoid that someone or something was out there with me, so I decided to head in. Plus the sun was setting, and dusk would be upon me soon, so I started walking back towards my house, which would mean I would have to walk uphill. So I start walking at first. I was walking out of the woods, like I was in someone's yard, and they had told me to get off. Not a fast pace, but moving with a purpose, you know. Then I kind of felt like someone was really looking at me, so I turned around and saw a large creature, about 80 yards, or less. I'm not really sure how far my house is from that stream, but it was over there, across that stream. It then proceeded to take steps toward me, and I'm not really athletic, but I'm not mega weak. I saw that I had to run about 20 yards uphill through the woods, which would normally take me 30 to 40 seconds, but I ran out of those woods in about 10 seconds. It is the most I have ever been scared in my life, and the most adrenaline that has ever flown through me. Now I know what you're wondering. Could I have been dehydrated or having hallucinations? Well, I've never hallucinated once in my life, and I wasn't dehydrated because about 10 minutes prior to this event, I drank an entire bottle of water, and I always make sure I'm hydrated before I go into the woodlands exploring. And there is no way that it was a tree, because every time I go out there, I go to where I spotted it, and there isn't a single tree small enough to remotely look like what I saw. Since then, I haven't spotted it, but I hear it. It is believed by the Native Americans that Wendigos call out for help, like a human, in order to lure people toward it. I have heard what sounds like a little girl calling for help out in those woods before. It is still terrifying to talk or think about. Could anyone please help me or tell me that I'm not crazy? Because I feel like I am. Please give me all the feedback you can. I'm really terrified of this phenomena. Thanks for watching. I encourage you to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe if you want. Oh yeah, and one last thing. Stay spooky, my friends. Now do it.
Hi.